we're going to go ahead and now move to our second session of this morning. And we're going to present Gloria Rivera and Holly Silvestri, Dr. Holly Silvestri. Gloria is an English-Spanish certified medical CMI and CHI and California court interpreter, conference interpreter, translator, and instructor. Gloria is a core faculty of the NCI at the University of Arizona and a recipient of the 2018 CHIA's Instructor of the Year Award. She mixes her background as a physician surgeon, her experience as a freelancer and staff medical translator and interpreter to develop classes that are practical, interesting, and fun at Blue IEP. And alongside her, we have Dr. Holly Silvestri, which is the CEO of Linguistic Connections. She is also a senior coordinator of the training and translation and curriculum at the National Center for Interpretation, a unit of the University of Arizona. She has also taught in the translation and interpretation undergraduate Spanish major at UA. Her working languages are English, Spanish, and French. She specializes in community interpreting and the interpreter and translator training. So without further ado, welcome, Gloria. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you.
Thank you. So welcome today to our glossary creation for IEPs. I'll be the MC, I guess. Holly.
Yes, so before we go on, we're going to do a little talk about some legal things. So any legal information provided in this workshop does not represent legal advice. Please consult with your own attorney. Sorry, I'm an attorney, but I can't be your attorney for these purposes.
And also, if you consult an attorney, that is tax deductible. Yay.
Exactly.
Housekeeping. This webinar will be language neutral, but of course, since we're both English, Spanish interpreters, our examples will have Spanish. I'm sorry. Questions, please leave your questions for the end. We'll have a Q&A area. And sometimes, you know what, I've noticed that when I have a question, if I'm a little bit patient, the answer comes up. You will receive a link to AAITE's website. Alex is your man. And there you will find a recording, and you have 30 days to watch a recording, so please plan accordingly. You will also receive a handout, so do not freak out. Everything you see here will be on that handout. Anything we talk about, then you might want to write down maybe. We will not have CUs, but thank you for being us today on a Saturday morning.
Indeed.
This is me. Alex already introduced me, so I'm going to skip it.
Yeah.
And this is Holly.
Same deal.
Same thing. Same deal. The agenda, this is all the items we will talk about today. Intro, definitions, why are we here today? What's a standard glossary and why is it so amazing? We will talk about learning styles, glossary types, samples, and we'll share a lot of goodies or resources, and then we'll have our Q&A. Introduction.
Okay, so the idea is one of the laws that we'll be talking about today. And the reason that we start with the law is because it's really, really important that you're familiar with the law, because this is the law combined with the Civil Rights Act that gives you the right to be in the room in that IEP meeting, right? So I think it's paramount that interpreters understand what the law says so that if there are any questions, they can answer them properly. So the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which is known as IDEA, is created to ensure that all children with disabilities have a free and appropriate public education. And that's an acronym that you're going to see a lot, FAPE. So get that into your head already, because that is one of the terms that you're going to need. It may not even necessarily be one that you have to put in your glossary, but you will hear this over and over. This FAPE is emphasizing that special education and related services are designed to meet the unique needs of the children that you're talking about in this meeting and prepare them not only for further education, but also employment and independent living, which a lot of people don't necessarily understand. But this is also part of the reason that later on in a child's IEP meetings, they have the transition section, because they're transitioning them out of K through 12 into either employment an independent living or a further education system. So there is an element of that as well in the IEP meetings. So the first thing you need to know is that the goal of the IEP is to create a specialized program to allow the child to be on par in the fact that they're learning with the children who are quote unquote in general ed, right? You have that parallel general ed and sorry, special ed. It's personalized for each child. This is why it's so hard to sort of understand what you're walking into for an IEP, because the child's issues are going to be discussed, and sometimes you don't know them ahead of time. The purpose is to set goals and objectives. The law was written so that schools would be held accountable, right? The lawyers in the room always want some kind of way to measure how this is working. And it describes the services that the child's going to receive as a part of their special ed program, okay? So for an example, you may see things like Juan, who's a 10-year-old perhaps with severe autism. There'll be statements in an IEP talking about the goals. So Juan's difficulty with social interaction goal may be that he has to start having appropriate and friendly conversations with classmates 85% of the time by the end of March and have them be successful. Or if he's got issues with stemming, and if this is a term you don't understand, this is kind of the self-soothing thing that a lot of severe autism children do. And the goal there might be to have a teacher's assistant. There's another abbreviation you're going to want to know, a TA, who works with him on impulse control. And the goal might be control the urge to stim when he's stressed 65% of the time by the end of the year, right? Because stimming can be off-putting and they want him to have better social interaction with everyone. There may be issues with personal care. So you may see things like Juan will be able to brush his teeth on his own after dinner every night by the end of, with 85% success at the end of April. Oftentimes these goals are scaffolded. They can be short-term or they can be long-term. So they scaffold sometimes the short ones to make the long-term goal possible. Now, when we talk about IEPs, I want to make it clear that we're not going to talk about 504s today, okay? A 504 is labeled as such because it's the law that created it is Section 504 of the ADA. That has nothing to do with IDEA. It is complementary. It is kind of the catch-all of 5.4 for a medical problem that causes a problem with learning. So you may have, for example, a child that has a certain medical issue and they need to accommodate it to allow them to learn. But this does not imply a modification of curriculum. That is where you have an IEP. So an example might be of a 504, mind you, a chronic bowel issues child who has permission to go to the bathroom anytime he wants, or he can go longer on a timed test because he's got these issues where he may need to go to the bathroom frequently, or a child that has migraines who has permission to go to the nurse's office and lie down until the episode is over or until they take their medication and then they can come back without interrupting the teacher every time that this happens. The teacher just sort of knows. So that is not what we'll be talking about today, but those issues are also relevant for creating a glossary. And some of the things we'll talk about today as far as resources will be absolutely useful if you have a 504 as well. And Gloria will talk about those when she talks about Merck later on. Now, one more law. Sorry, I know. You always put the lawyers first, then you get them out of the room because nobody likes to listen to them. You need to know about FERPA. For those of you who are medical interpreters, FERPA is kind of like HIPAA. Okay, and this is relevant for interpreters because it is like HIPAA in the sense that it's a federal law, but it doesn't talk about your privacy of your medical records. It talks about the privacy of the student educational record. And this is important because oftentimes schools receive federal funds under an applicable program of the U.S. Department of Education, so FERPA applies to them. Almost all schools in the United States do receive some sort of funds, much like if a HIPAA applies to any doctor or dentist, and they oftentimes don't know that they're responsible for language access because of that. They must hire an interpreter if the person comes in. Schools sometimes don't realize that FERPA has this issue as well. So there's some misconceptions out there with respect to interpreters and how FERPA can help them. First thing, there is a misconception that the interpreter is not a part of the educational team in some cases, right? And that is absolutely not true. FERPA itself, the law itself, defines a school official as a person who's either employed by the school, so this is the staff interpreters, or someone who's been contracted by the school to perform a special task. Hello, that's interpreting, and that's freelancers. So that pretty much covers everybody that they are part of the educational team. They are considered a school official. Now, why is this important? Because the other misconception is interpreters can't request documents in advance because they're not part of that school officials. Well, yes, generally schools have to have written permission to release any information about a student's educational record, but FERPA specifically says that they can disclose those records without consent under the conditions that it's a school official with legitimate educational interest. So you can see right away that an interpreter is a school official with a legitimate educational interest. Therefore, you do have the right to request those documents. That's not at all what the school should be telling you. Oftentimes, they will say, oh, we can't release it because of FERPA, as a sort of stopgap, shortened version of saying, yeah, because of FERPA, i.e. confidentiality. The reality is they don't trust you to keep their things confidential, but that is not the case. We know that. You want to advance the slide? We can protect privacy, absolutely, as interpreters, whether you are in school or outside of the school as a freelancer. There are a lot of ways to do that. You can have an FTP file loading system that's encrypted, or you can have an encrypted email account. And again, like Gloria and I always like to say, if you are a freelancer, this is tax deductible, folks. It's part of your business.
So there's no excuse. God, we're the coughing sisters today.
Yeah.
So let me talk about an email account. That's a public service announcement. Please, for the love of God, get a business email account. It's okay. It's free. You can get a Gmail account or whatever account. You can get a paid one. You can get a free one. Again, like Holly said, it's tax deductible. And please, whenever you generate an email account, avoid nicknames like Gringo but Espanol at email. I've seen really funny emails while I've been teaching because I'm the one that processes and does everything. So I've seen some email account names that sound like they will emails, and it's not professional. Long numbers that are relevant to you, because remember, you're out there and you want to make it easy for someone to find you. So if you put a bunch of numbers, it's happened to me that you, for example, copy and paste and you miss one digit, that's when you cannot be found. Anything like, just like Thanksgiving, no politics, sex, religion. So it's great that you're politically active, but this is business. Anything flirty, cutesy, goofy, or risque, like Papi Chulo 69, Holly and I have seen really fun stuff.
Yeah.
Avoid.
At
And
all
a
costs.
spam filter nightmare like this one that people used to put a 1 before back in the day when email started. Please don't do it. This is funny, when I researched for this, anything that ends in AOL, Hotmail, or Yahoo, people assume you're like your grandma's age, and that's why they don't contact you. So there's ageism related to email accounts, believe it or not. So please get your email account. And I remember once I got contracted by a psychologist to be an interpreter, and I asked her, I always have the habit of asking, how do you find me? She told me she found me at the Judicial Council's website,
Yeah.
because there's a list, and that she told me this, she selected me because I had a paid email account. And I was like, oh, cool. Again, tax deductible, so don't miss opportunities.
Right, but it can let you know that let people know that this is a professional business, not just some, bilingual that's shacking up, putting up a shingle and going, I'm it, right?
You have a little kiosk on the street. So definitions, what's a glossary? It's an alphabetical list with meanings of the words or phrases in a text that are difficult to understand, or just a list. It doesn't have to be alphabetical, even though they tell you here by definition. So I got it from Cambridge Dictionary. Why do we need them? We need them because that's how we learn new vocabulary when we create our own glossaries. That's how we start learning specialized terminology, because sometimes clients have preferred terminology. I have tried to fight it, and I notice, you know what? They're paying me to do this. I'll just go with the flow. Then when you're translating or interpreting, it gives you consistency. So that way you don't have to start reinventing the wheel. It's happened to me when I first started, when I was a baby interpreter, that or translator, that I would go like, oh, I like this word. And then I continue translating and I'm like, oh, what's the word I liked? Oh, I forgot. So helps you save time. Also, when you're working with cat tools, I have the habit of, if I find the word I like, I go into my cat tool and I replace the previous version. So that way, Gloria from the future thanks Gloria from the past for making her life easier. Also, for localization, remember, we have the dialectal variants. The Arabic of Egypt is not the Arabic from Iraq or the Arabic from Morocco. So again, time. And again, saves you time, and time equals money. So for the people have been asking about the standard glossary, let me tell you, it's a myth, because one size does not fit all. Sorry to pop your bubble. Because different glossaries apply to different people. And there's nothing wrong with that. So maybe Holly has a type of glossary that works for her. That's great, because she found what works for her. But that doesn't mean it has to work for me. And it doesn't mean that since it doesn't work for me, that her glossary sucks. As long as it works for you, that's what matters. And here comes learning styles. When I learned about learning styles, pun intended, I realized that it's the way your brain likes to observe, process, and understand, and especially retain information. And everyone is different. Everyone learns differently. So again, what works for Holly, what works for Alex, it's okay. It doesn't have to work for you. And there's three main types we learn. There's a visual learning style, auditory, and kinesthetic. When you're visual, you learn using charts, graph diagrams, taking notes, rewriting and summarizing, using symbols or initials, and highlighting key terms. I was telling Holly, actually, I have my book here. I'm reading this book about translation theory because I'm a nerd. This is how I know I've been through a book. You see all my highlights here. That means just like Gloria was here. Same thing. That's how my brain processes things better. When you're auditory, it helps when you read terminology out loud and you change your tone. Remember when you were learning multiplication tables? That's how it works. Also, when you're listening to podcasts, that's when you go like, oh, that's a good word. Write it down. And then what you can do is you can sit down. We all have a recording device in our pocket. Record yourself. And then when you go walk your dog, when you go to the store, when you go for a walk, listen to it. The other way I learned, it's when I was telling Holly yesterday, sometimes I'm trying to figure out how to explain a concept. And I'm like, yeah, I'm 95% there. And then when I'm teaching, it clicks when I'm explaining it to other people. And mnemonics, that also helps. And of course, incorporating this new word in your daily conversation. So I know that incorporating IEP or FERPA and all that fun stuff may be a bit difficult, but give it a shot. And then when you're kinesthetic, that means that you learn by typing, writing index cards, old school. Actually, I like writing index cards using pictures or diagrams. Hands-on learning, that's what it means. Now we're going to talk about glossary types. And this is a classification I created because I couldn't find one that made me happy. So there's different ways you can have your glossaries, for example, on paper, using word processors, cloud-based, again, CAD tools, and online-based. Paper, you can see it. This is an old one I found online, and it's my favorite example. So as you can see, the favorite word of this guy called Nick Cave, who is an Australian singer-songwriter, was mixturation, which is a morbid desire to pass water. And so this is how he would find words that then he would later on incorporate in his songs. And I thought it was super cool that even a singer-songwriter benefits from glossaries. The next one is word processor. So you can use Word or Pages if you're on a Mac, and Excel or numbers. The cool thing about Word, it has autocorrect. The bad thing about Excel, it doesn't. So whenever you add a third G on squiggly, you're gonna get a squiggly underneath. Unfortunately, Excel, it goes like, I don't care. Type as you want. So you can see it doesn't tell you, hey, you messed it up. The problem with Word is it doesn't have tabs, and Excel organizes things in tabs. What do I mean? If you have one for psychological evaluation, the other one is for psychiatric evaluation, you have to have one document per area on Word. But the beauty of Excel or numbers is that you can have tabs. And the problem, there's also a problem and a good thing. When you have to search within each document, and this is similar because if you're searching about a term, for a term on Excel, you have to search within each tab. And for the cloud-based, Holly.
Yes. So there's a lot of options with cloud-based, but here comes the lawyer again to tell you that for those of you who are working in schools, a lot of you use Google Drive, and you probably put something like a sheet or an Excel in the Google Drive. Well, you've just given it to Google. A lot of people don't realize that when they use these Google materials, they submit to Google terms of service. And this is what it says, which is kind of poopy, therefore the poop icon. When you upload anything in Google Drive, you give Google a worldwide license to use it, host, restore it, reproduce it, modify it, create derivative works with it, etc., for any of the content. So not only are you losing your creative rights to it, but it's worldwide. And even if you remove stuff afterwards, the license continues even after you pull it out, because once they've captured it, it's gone. So you can narrow, with this, some of the terms or settings, but unfortunately, you cannot narrow it to the point where you submit stuff and it's still yours, right? You need to pay places like Dropbox if you want it to be yours and they don't go through your stuff. This is also, by the way, just as a side note of interest, this is why when you put stuff in Google, then two hours later, you get those ads in your Gmail. Like if you're looking up where maybe where you want to go and stay in Argentina, you get the airline ads for flights to Argentina in your email. They've read your stuff. That's why. So it's
They
not
can
fun.
read your mind, but they can read your stuff. Which is
Right.
like
They
the
can't
same
read
at
your
this
mind, but
point.
they can read your stuff if you put it in Google Drive. So
Yes.
be wary of that. I know that schools are very dependent on it, but it's a problem, I think, for some of us. Not that you don't want your material out there. I just think that you may not want to share. I personally don't share glossaries not because I'm stingy. I think we should help one another, but because I think you learn through doing the glossary. I can't tell you the number of times where I've gone to a workshop, taken the glossary, and I've never opened it again, right? And I consider myself a professional. It's just a matter of time. So this one, however, is the good side of using these cloud-based ones, because you can do a search on the internet and you can sometimes find a gem like this one, which I found, which has English, Spanish, and Mandarin. And I don't think it's simplified Mandarin either. Someone will probably email me later to tell me I'm wrong, but it's a great thing. I did, however, find this on the Department of Ed website in Massachusetts. And so the caveat here is be careful, because the terminology in these glossaries may or may not apply to your state. A lot of people don't realize that each and every state is responsible in the United States for its own education. And sometimes even within a district, right? You'll have certain terms that are going to be used in one district versus another that are used for consistency purposes and are the preferred version. And that may not be the case with the neighboring school or the neighboring state. So you do need to be careful when you take these, wholeheartedly created lovely little gems that you find, and you're saying, oh, okay, but I'm going to use this in Rhode Island. I would do a little bit of a check. Check that you've got some of the terms that you need for the state that you're doing the relevant work in.
Mhm.
So
I mean, where's the arrow? Aha. Then we
now,
also have prose,
mhm,
prosy.
yes, this is another lovely place where you can find ready-made glossaries and look at all of the lovely possibilities with respect to language. Now, that doesn't mean they all have something there that's going to be of value to you, and you can put it in the little My Glossaries section so that you have access to it if you join. And I think it's free to join Prosy. There's a free version
It,
versus a paid version, I think. So I don't
yeah,
think you need
that's
to
why
be a
there's
paid version in order to save your glossaries, but I'm not sure. You'll have to check that
no,
on
you
a
don't have
personal
to
basis.
because I have the free
Good.
version and free version works. So you
Okay.
can find other
Good.
people's glossaries
Yes,
and
and
you
that's
can
the
create your
problem.
own.
Right. But if you
Yes,
find
trust no
somebody
one.
else's, unfortunately, you do need to be aware that sometimes these are crowdsourced. Sometimes the person isn't perhaps as responsible as you as to making sure that that is actually the term. They may have just grabbed it from some website and assumed without doing the checking that this is actually the term that is relevant to the English version. And that can make us all look bad. So do be aware. The other
Yeah.
issue is that you can use things like Quizlet for this as well. That is also cloud-based, and that's a wonderful tool because it's also a study tool at the same time, right? You can study your things ahead of an IEP meeting if you know that you have certain terms that you're going to be needing. And of course, they do the same thing that a lot of sites do now. You can you can put things in whatever term you need in the language, and it won't get the squigglies, which will tell you, it's not English. What are you doing? Right? So that's not a problem that way. But there again, what you find on Quizlet may or may not be accurate. So please be responsible if you're taking these ready-made sources and correct what was crowdsourced so that you know that you're using a glossary that is accurate. Because remember, our first ethical principle is accuracy, not just I'm going to fill it in with any word I found and therefore I'm good, I'm done, right?
Yeah.
So as a professional, it is your responsibility to make sure you check on those.
Yeah. Or just use it. Sometimes I use it as inspiration of the words I should know. Or you can, for example, if Holly and I are going to work on an IEP glossary on Quizlet, you can work together, and it's like it takes a village, it takes a village. So this is Quizlet Plus, that's the paid one.
Right.
Then we have CAT tools, which a CAT starts for computer assisted translation. It's not a CAT with tools. It's always a computer program. It's not machine translation. And the translation is more efficient this way because you keep consistency. Like someone said on the chat, sometimes you work with different school districts, so you want to keep consistency. You can create your translation memory as you go. This is what you create as you're typing. Helps when you have to review because you have the review version. So sometimes I find a word that I like at the beginning of a translation, and then I research a little bit more. I'm like, ooh, I like this word much better. So I change it on my glossary. But what I do is when I review it, it makes sure that your glossary matches the words you're using. So it lets you know, hey, you forgot to change this word on page 1 and you're on page 50. And you can create different glossaries. For example, I do marketing translation, I do medical, and I also do art now. So I have a glossary for art, a glossary for marketing, and a glossary for medical stuff, another one for social stuff. There are a bunch of CAT tools out there. Which one is the best one? Quoting my dear friend who was a project manager, is the one the client you work for prefers. Every CAT tool is different. Some are friendlier. For example, I use WordFast because I'm on a Mac. They're really good with Macs. And I don't want to have to create a partition and get all techie, so I can use Stratos. Every CAT tool is different. So find the one that your favorite client prefers and go for that. Again, Google Translate, DeepL, and Lingui are not CAT tools. Please remember
Yes,
this.
please understand that.
And then for online base, which obviously are paid, we have Interplex, Interpret Bank, Interpreters Help. And we found this from Ola Language. It's an educational terms glossary. So what's the problem? It's good for California.
Right.
So again, with a grain of salt. Every time you see a glossary for education, always ding, 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 state, If you contact them and tell them, hey, is it applicable for Arizona or Oklahoma? If they tell you, yeah, it is, sure, it's good for California, I'm like, it's a red flag. Don't go for it. We have 16 minutes, so we're gonna go through glossary examples. Here you have on the left your source language, and on the right your target language. So the problem I have with a bilingual glossary is that if I've seen this happen, actually, someone said she enjoys playing squash. This is what they meant. And it was translated as she enjoys playing with her pumpkin or calabaza, which is our word for pumpkin. So that's the problem I have with bilingual glossaries. It's
Context
hit or
is
miss.
king. Right.
Yep, that's why we need to have a definition there, or just an example. You don't have to get that technical. Then if your language has an article, like for example, I'm going to butcher German. If you know that squash means Butternus curbis, you have to figure out if it's der, the, or das. That's when you have your article, and then you can have an example or a puree. And then I included above, as you can see, you also can include the link, because that's what Holly does. And I thought I was like, whoa, I don't do that. But hey,
Well, it's
again, it doesn't
important
mean
though.
it's bad. Yeah, it means it works for her.
Right. Because I've had people question, like, where did you get that term? And it's like, well, right here,
Really?
actually. Right here. So
Hopefully, I mean, I've had to, I guess when they ask me, why do you use this term? I just look for it. And I'm like, because of this.
mhm.
Then remember, languages have registers. So, I forgot to delete the L. Colloquial register, it's always one thing or the other. Means that it's what we finally call low. So I just put it between quotation marks. So booty or butt. Mid register, which is called familiar, I just leave it as is. When it's a high register or technical or frozen, I underline it. So buttocks, which is more
Right.
formal.
So those are key
And
ways
when,
to figure out if just by looking at it, what the register is. You should have your own system if you're going to use this.
yeah, that's my system. Again, just because it's my system, it doesn't mean it's perfect and everyone should do what I do. I'm showing you an example. If you like it, cool. If you, for example, prefer to use technical terms and you write them in red, or you have green, blue, black, and it works for you, please keep using it. And then for expletives, I use an asterisk. Also remember, there's variations within each dialect. Like I mentioned, there's Arabic for Egypt and Iraq and Lebanon and Morocco. So for example, if you ask, every time I get asked a question, how do you say skirt? I'm like, context. That's why I go to context. Because in Peru, I say falda, but in Argentina, dicen pochera. So you need to know who you're talking to. This is how you can do it if you're including a register within your glossary. So for example, here in the bottom, let me get a pen. You can see here, sentaderas is colloquial, pompas as how they say in Mexico, or pompis. And culo, it's okay when you're in Spain, but it's not okay when you're in Mexico. So we have this like nursery rhyme when you're sick and they tell you sana, sana, colita de rana, which is heel, heel, frog's butt. But in Spain, they don't say colita, they say culito, which to me is hilarious, but not when you tell that to a Mexican mom, you know? So now the fun part, Holly.
Yes. So this is all fine and dandy. Once you've decided on the format and the style that you're going to use, you need to start filling it in. And where do you go, right? Because there's not a lot of ready-made stuff out there for education. It's still, a very wide open field. Well, I go to the National Center for Education Statistics, which is the NCIS, which I love because it has data that you can use to say, okay, this is the logical place to begin. For example, this is the 2021 site, which has updated the percentage. No, it's fine. That tells us that specific learning disabilities was 33% of the services that were provided all over the US. So chances are, if you don't know exactly what your IEP is, at least you know that a third of them have to do with SLD, right? Specific learning disabilities. So statistically, you may not get an SLD after doing all the work to put the vocabulary together, but still, in the lifetime of your interpreting in schools, you will come across it more frequently than not, probably. So I also like to just sort of read part of the data, and you can see also speech and language impairment. If you pair those two together, you can see that almost 50% of the services that are being given in the United States are those two specializations, right? SLD, so specific learning disability. So you're going to have the school psychologist and that kind of testing, and speech and language impairment, SLP, speech language pathologist is the person that you're going to be dealing with for that. You do need to understand, however, that there is a lot of research for those of you who are talking about spoken interpreters, because I think we may have some ASL interpreters in the room as well. For spoken interpreters, the SLP, unfortunately, often is called upon because a lot of teachers in the United States don't understand, well, people in general don't understand the stages of language acquisition, and they assume that a child is having difficulty with language, often because it looks very similar to a person who's learning language, right? Some of the signs and symptoms are the same. So it's often misdiagnosed in bilingual children that they have some sort of a speech or language impairment when actually they're just at an early stage in their language acquisition of English, and being merged into the general education population, the teacher's frustrated and doesn't understand why they just can't do the work, right? So it's unfortunate. That being the case, you do also then take that information, and I also go to the US Department of Ed, another gold mine of a website, not only because it's got some laws and guidance where you can go and get real information. I know, the lawyer, again, is telling you to go and read the law. I know it's boring, but it really, really can help and give you a background, okay? And it will also give you the text. You can see here, Gloria has put a place where you can go and find the text of FERPA right away. Now, as a second step, I then go and look on the Department of Education website, and I search in the website for specific learning disability, right? And then you'll see, I can find out, oh, how do I ID it? You know that's going to be part of the IEP, right? That they need to figure out how to ID it. What's the issue before they can address the issue with the services that they're going to provide. So once you've got that and you click on that, it's gorgeous because it gives you the section of the law, right, which lists all of the things that you're going to be talking about in the meeting, whether you realize it or not, right? Because it's how they determine whether the child has an SLD. This is one of the most frequent reasons that people refer persons to special ed for, because it's such a broad issue. It's not really well defined. So they have to have multiple ways that they've got the child as not achieving grade level standards. So they have to look at oral expression, listening comprehension, written comprehension, and all of those. But that lovely list is not only indicative of what's going to happen in the meeting, it's also really indicative for you of, okay, I need to then do a mini site translation right now, right, in my language, and be able to say, okay, I don't need to put that in. I do need to put that in my glossary and have it as a backup, because I cannot site translate without having a pause. And that tells you exactly where your weak points are with respect to this kind of an IEP. This also tells you, if you look at, here it is, the law again, it tells you what exactly the types of disabilities are that you need to worry about in IEPs, because there's only 13 according to the law. That's why the 504, which we talked about before, kind of catches everything else, because unless it's in this portion of the law where they define it, it's not going to be an IEP. So again, here, this gives you a clue as to, okay, when you combine it with the statistics, which one I would start with to create my list, right? You saw at the very beginning, if you were paying attention, that the bottom was emotional disturbance. There's very few IEPs that you're going to go to that's the case. So that would be maybe the last part of the glossary that I would start to put together. But this again is a lovely thing to do right away. Can you, if you're an ASL, sign these issues? Can you, if you're a spoken interpreter, immediately tell me what these are, both high and low register, because remember, a lot of the parents that we're dealing with, we have to work with the specialist to adjust the register as well. So you need to be able to say this in the high and the low register for all of the things that are listed here. If you can't, that's when you start doing your research, right? And put it in a glossary.
My part.
Your part.
So, believe it or not, the Merck manual is free. It's online, and you have two versions. One is the professional, and the other one is the home one. And also, it has really good translations. I've rarely found mistakes in Spanish. So, like Holly said, this is what I like to do whenever I dive into a new area or a new specialty. What I do is I start doing a side translation. And if you're an ASL interpreter, just read it and sign it. And if you have an issue and go like, oh, what's the difference between, for example, psychologist and psychiatrist, just stop and then keep going and then research what's the difference. It's better to have to make mistakes and to look things up before you start working on something that while you're interpreting. So what you can do is, for example, treatment of intellectual disability. These are all the terms you can find in this little bit of text. And also, we were laughing with Holly, the States loves acronyms. They love 3 to 4 letters. So sometimes they start saying she needs to go to PT or she needs to do OT, and you're like, oh, what's that? It's better to figure it out before you need to say it, right? So here you go.
Because translating it as OTE, that's my language
Actually,
access.
you know what? No, you know what I do? I say, you have to do an OT, and I say it in Spanish because that triggers a mom to say, what's that?
Yeah.
And then when the mom says, what's that? I interpret what's that. And then the provider, the doctor, whomever says,
Yeah, they get shaken out of it.
Yeah, it's an occupational therapist. And then I say, terapeuta ocupacional. And they go like, and what's that? And then I go like, and what's that? And then the doctor goes like, oh, so it's an indicator for them to slow their roll, simplify things, because they shouldn't be using acronyms to begin with. So that's how I poke them. So this is called parallel text. You have a text written originally in English. In this case, is the tweaked version because this wasn't originally written in Spanish. It's been translated into Spanish. But if you see, you can find neurologist, neurólogo, developmental behavioral pediatrician, pediatra especializado en el desarrollo de la conducta, orthopedist, no es ortopeda, es traumatólogo, ding, 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 and so on and so forth. And then you go like, oh, cool. But what does everything mean? Because, okay, you know the words, but you also need to know the concepts. So you go to pediatra especializado, traumatólogo, you go to Real Academia Nacional de Medicina España, which is the Royal Academy of Medicine in Spain. So traumatólogo tells you he's an orthopedist. Terapeuta físico, see, I am from Peru, so I say terapeuta físico, and then I met people from Mexico say fisioterapeuta, and I'm like, oh, that's weird. It's not weird. It's kind of when people say there's no strangers, it's just friends you haven't met yet. These are not strange words. It's words you haven't met yet. So fisioterapeuta, it's obviously preferred in Spain. Terapeuta ocupacional, it tells you what it is. So that way you have very prepared educational interpreter that's going to go to a meeting very prepared. So this. Then you have the American Speech Language Hearing Association. This is just a bit I found, and look at all the beautiful words you're going to find there. So how do you say functional in German? How do you say motor neurological in Japanese? How do you sign structural? Do you use the same structural for a building and structural for healthcare? You know, these are the questions you need to ask yourself before you go into an assignment. Right. Then children's hospitals have beautiful websites. For example, CHOP, there's a children's hospital in Philadelphia. You go to conditions, you can search learning disability. Look at all the beautiful things that pop up. The Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne. You go to Kids Health Info. you find this. Also, if you want to improve your auditory learning, they have a podcast, which is funny because it's, well, it's not funny, but to me, it's funny because it's very Australian English. So this is also how you get used to different accents
Absolutely.
because not all providers are American English based.
No, many of them
Sometimes
are not.
sometimes I feel I need an interpreter for the doctor.
So true.
True story. And they get pissed off. Yeah. So Chalk is a children's hospital for Orange County. Look at their rehabilitation services, speech and language therapy. So you go there and look, boom, feeding disorders, swallowing disorders, cognitive communication, voice disorders, receptive. And please do not freak out. You don't have to do everything next week or in the 30 days you have time to watch this recording. Pick one thing per week. So this week is going to be my speech and language pathology week. I'm going to pick one thing. You know what? It may not come up, but you're going to feel better because you're going prepared to an assignment. And then for psychology and psychiatry, you have the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. So resource center, anxiety disorders, attention deficit, hyperactivity disorder, autism, bipolar, all that fun stuff that you will see in your handouts.
Now, there's easy peasy, right? Finding those lovely pre-made things that you think are going to work for you. But frankly, more often than not, easy peasy makes me queasy because upon further investigation, it ain't going to do what I need it to do, right? So let's take, for example, something that everybody thinks looks legit, Lingui or Google Translate. And I just want to shoot myself in the head every time I hear someone say, oh, I use Lingui. Of course it's correct. Yeah, no, I don't think so. Okay. What you need to know is Lingui is not a dictionary. It sort of advertises itself as a dictionary, but what it does is it goes and it's a web crawler program and it aggregates all of the things that are on the web. And we all know that everything on the web is right? Hello? No. So you may have the same problem because the web is another place that's crowdsourced and you need to check, not just go to Lingui, but then check, is that really how it's said? Do your back translation, figure out what it's actually saying. And then of course, translate for the lesser languages. Obviously, it's not going to work for, as far as I know, ASL, but for the lesser spoken languages, it's not as good, right? Because Google is only as good as how much you put in there. So for those of you who are always complaining, like, I never get a job because people use Google Translate, well, stop using Google Translate and stop making it a better engine, but okay. And Google Translate for the best of both worlds, right? In Spanish, because it's so used in Spanish, it is fairly decent, but even then, you really need to take a look at it because it does sound really canned, right? So, and I would not, it's an acronym or it's an algorithm. It picks the first word in the dictionary that matches the English word that you put in. So it doesn't think. You have to be the one who thinks. So the more complex and embedded the kind of material you're putting in there, and please, please, please don't put anything in there that you need to have a confidentiality agreement about. I've seen people put in whole entire parts of, oh God, help me, of IEPs. And they're leaving the student's name in. And then seriously, you can go and check yourself, Google IEP and go down about 10 pages and you will see the mistakes that people have made in the last 10 to 20 years of just putting in IEPs in there, and people's stuff is in there. And that's not cool because that's a violation of FERPA. It's also really invasive. Do you really want to be Googled 10 years from now and have this come up, your IEP from when you were in 7th grade? I don't think so. So, and that's what happens with Google. You give them that opportunity.
Also about Lingui, what I like to explain to people is like Lingui goes and finds websites that have been translated. So the problem is, I don't know if that translator has the adequate background to do a translation. So sometimes I use it as inspiration more than, or what not to say than what I need to say.
And sometimes it's good because it'll trigger a word that is not quite right, but that'll be like, oh, okay, so now I need to go find a synonym for this because it's not quite the right word. Now, the ones that you can trust a little bit more, but again, a grain of salt, please. A grain of salt, please. is things like word reference. I particularly like the forum part because then you have a little bit more information. People are talking back and forth and they're explaining. Sometimes there's an argument. Well, it's said like this in Peru, but it's said like this in Costa Rica. Which one is better? Well, it depends on where you are and who your client is. That's not an easy answer. And the same thing with prose or prosy, however you pronounce it. It's always an argument. It's like apple and
Base and vase.
right, vase and vase or potato patata. You have to do your research, right? Again, along with word reference. This is the grain of salt part. It's a good starting point, but don't count it at 100%. Just like what we said with the ready-made materials. Anywhere you find something ready-made, it's not the quick fix that you think it is, because you do have to sort of take a look at it and say, okay, this person understood the concept of a terminology glossary for interpreters or translators, or this person perhaps didn't and just grabbed whatever they found.
It's the end. Oh my God, we made it. Woo.
Woohoo!
Any questions? Oh, there's some questions in the chat. Let me check.
Yeah.
So, see, so Geraldine Casimiro, thank you. She said, we serve 4 different school districts. Therefore, consistency is important. Totally agree. Thank you for my glossary. TM compatibility. Oh, yes. So when you have a translation memory, remember, when you use a CAT tool, the translation memory, you are creating it. So I've seen people that buy them. And again, trust no one. Or sometimes, you know what, because of consistency, your client can send you their translation memory. It's like, this is what we have put together. So it populates, it helps because it populates, I don't know, phrases or sentences that someone has already translated. So it helps.
And right, and those are approved sentences, right? So you want to use
yeah,
that
so it's
terminology.
the approved sentences. So it's kind of like giving you something that it goes beyond the glossary. This is like the sentence we use, or the set phrases we use.
And for compatibility,
helps.
almost all the time you can change it from one to another, right? Just because you use
Yes.
WordFast doesn't mean it doesn't work in Trados. You just have to expunge it. That's fine.
Yes, so that's a problem. Sometimes you would see people sending you email like, I need a translator, English, Spanish, specialized in education. You're like, yes, that's Trados compatible. No, because I use WordFast. So, I mean, you kind of win them all. And I don't know, it works sometimes. Oh, I forgot to mention, of course, there are free CAT tools out there, but again, there's no free lunch. You're creating their translation memory that then they turn and sell to other people. So you're working for them for free.
Right.
Or you're
Much like
exchanging
Google.
a free CAT tool for your
work,
work.
basically. Yeah. It's much like Google.
So
thank you very much.
in
Here's something for free, no free lunch.
Yeah, the lower the register, the harder it is to interpret. Oh my God, sometimes the words that have been difficult for me are not medical words, are like the low register words. And I work at Stanford Hospital. And sometimes when I go back to the office, I'm like, I have a new one. And they're like, what? Okay. And I give them a sentence and they're like, oh, what's that? Guess what? It means this. And they're like, and then we write it down. So this is something you can also do, like gather around every time you find something that throws you off, share it with your peers. It's like, this lady said this. Oh my God. And it's like, it's funny because we start guessing and I'm like, video, cold. And then you're getting warmer.
Right.
So yeah, and again,
you can do that electronically. You don't need to be in the same space, because I know I've spoken with some of the people that are in some of the committees that I'm working on, and they have a WhatsApp group and they just shoot it out, right? And say, hey, this is the term. What do they say in your country? What does this term mean to you?
Yeah,
and you get a pretty quick response. So
yeah, you can have a Google document, since all the districts already use them. Have a floating Google Doc and add things to it,
Right.
And then please do not minimize other dialects. It really bothers me when I hear an interpreter say, oh, you know how this insert nationality here is. And I'm like, no, how are they? Just because you speak a different dialect, that doesn't make it better or worse,
Right. That's contributing to the ingrained racism in this country. We don't need to do that.
No, we don't need to do that. And then I think that's the end of the questions. Oh, yeah, OT. Yeah, because I remember once I told an occupational therapist, oh, you're a PT, right? And she was like, how dare you? I'm an occupational therapist. I'm like, oh no, what did I do? And it's funny because I told her, you know what's, I know when I'm like, hold on, I don't know what it is. I'm not trying to be offensive, which I don't know why she got so pissed off. And I told her, oh, that's like when you call me a translator and I'm an interpreter. And so we exchange knowledge.
Right.
Yeah. Da, 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 da. See, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it's how do I say squid? How do I say this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember once I interpreted for a doctor because I used to interpret a lot in the AD, and it went beautifully until he said, okay, we'll close the loop later. And I was like, well, I just told her I'll be back later
Yeah.
because I sometimes when it's something like this, like an idiomatic expression, I just think about the feeling I get.
Mhm.
And then I go into Spanish because idiomatic expressions are the things that also
Yeah.
throw you off. So if you have any questions in the future, this is how you can reach us. I'm on Twitter, not so much. I'm more on Instagram. I forgot to add, I have a Facebook group for medical translators and interpreters, and Holly, you can always find her on
Yep.
her
Right here.
email. So thank you so much for sharing your Saturday with us. It's been tons of fun.
Right.
I
I
hope you
do.
learned a thing or two.
Yes. And I do want to say we have enormous amounts of handouts. I have the handout that Gloria so graciously created so that you will all have a copy of the slides, but I also have ASL materials. So anyone who needs those can contact Alex directly, and he will be happy to hand those over to you if you need them. We didn't put a lot of ASL in here because we just didn't think we had the time, and I apologize to the ASL people in the audience that might have thought we might have more for them, but I have a lot of resources for you in the handout, so feel free to ask those of Alex, okay?
Yes.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you, Holly. Really appreciate your wonderful presentation on this
Thank
topic.
you.
There is one more comment.
Huh,
I think Jimena, you
missed
had a
it.
comment. I don't know if you want to come live and
Oh yeah, you mentioned not to criticize other Spanish dialectal variations. I think that also applies to Spanish in the US. True.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's
Spanish,
very important.
the second largest country with the most Spanish speakers in the world, besides Mexico and Colombia. So I think we should honor that too. I know I used to have a lot of biases too as well, and that has removed recently. So anyway,
It's not easy. So, but we can always try. And also, oh, this is a side note I'm very passionate about. If you're a Spanish interpreter and you notice your one of the parents is kind of off, always ask, do you speak another language at home? And if you go like, yeah, I speak Mixteco, Chinanteco, Zapoteco,
Make sure that people
Quiche,
know, yeah.
Ixil, Mom, please stop and inform the other parties. This is interpreter speaking. I just asked, confirm with the parent that they are a mom speaker. And when they go like, oh, but he's from Guatemala, just tell them, yes, but this is an indigenous language from Guatemala. Is as if he spoke Chinese. This is what I started saying because they assume that since we're from a Spanish speaking country, like I had a patient I was told was hard of hearing. He spoke Quechua. And I was like, no,
Yeah.
he's not hard of hearing. You're speaking Spanish, he speaks Quechua. It's like, but he's from Peru. Exactly. So please also support our indigenous languages speakers because yes, they may speak a little bit of Spanish, but we're doing the same thing with criticize with people that tell them, oh, he understands English. No, they need an interpreter in their own language. Stop everything and advocate for them, please.
Right. It's very important. Absolutely
Yes.
very important.
go ahead, Giovanna. You have a question or a comment?
I do, but I feel that Eva has something that segues in what they were just talking. So I will defer to Eva first.
Oh, Thank you for yielding floor. I just, to applaud that because I have been in those instances a lot here in Oakland. And also it's very important to ask the specific region or town they come from because that also brings another layer of complexity. In our case is ma'am, and they do not speak the same dialect. And so we have been able to provide interpreters from Todos Santos, but then the parents are from a different place. And so, or they speak a different dialect. And so that's one. And second one is we have reluctancy from users, from LEPs about accepting a MAM interpreter because the community is so small that they fear breaches of confidentiality. So that's the other, the third layer of in this complexity. But yeah, we do encourage parents to, as much as possible, get an interpreter in their own language. And thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Oh, I'm very passionate about this. And yeah, because I attended this conference at the ATA, and that's when it hit me that you usually hear Mixteco alto, Mixteco bajo, and that's not how the people that speak Mixteco self-identify. It's Mixteco from, and that's how I explain it because I live in Oakland too. So it's like the Mixteco from Oakland is different from the Mixteco in LA. So yes, they're both Mixteco, but just this distance, it means languages have evolved differently. So they don't understand each other completely. So I had a patient that he was an Ixil patient speaker, and I was able to find an over-the-phone interpreter because this is very difficult to find. And he told me, I don't understand her that much, but since I was interpreting into Spanish, it was super complex because I would interpret from English to Spanish, and then he would have the phone interpreter. So he put it together. But that was kind of like, I felt like I was duct taping the whole situation, but he had to be discharged, and they had been trying to find an interpreter in his own language, and it was very difficult. So sometimes you just do your best because there's nothing. I mean, it was that versus him not understanding anything. So you just go like this and do your best.
Thank you, Eva. Giovanna, go ahead.
If he had to be discharged, you would wonder what had happened up until the discharge. But
I
that's
don't want to
enough.
go there, but
That's enough.
no.
No, but that was
Actually,
the
you know what? They had found an interpreter that they can contract, but at a certain time.
Mhm.
So he had language, and he would tell you, I want to speak. This is the other thing you find. I want to speak Spanish. I want to practice my Spanish. And I'm like, oh no, this is not the
No,
best.
not
That's
today.
the other, like, that's like, I love it when in ASL they said that's the other client issue you might find, that your client doesn't want to speak their own language. They want, because they're proud of speaking Spanish. So it's like you're fighting them, like, no, speaking your language, but I want to speak Spanish. Like, keep staying your language. So in this case, they had an interpreter for his own language, but he just wanted to be discharged. So they had to, you know how it is in this country,
Yeah,
patient
that-
mandates.
absolutely. And that goes to the power of education, right? And the power of each one of us to learn about each other so that we can advocate for the profession and comfortably talk about things other than our own. But I wanted to ask you a question because you had a very nice list of CAT tools.
Yes.
And it's easy to say, pick the one that your favorite client has. However, you may
Yeah.
get the one that you don't have, right? Can you tell us in very simple words about the TM compatibility? And so the ability then to use the one that you use the most, but also to be able to go across.
Oh, so not all. So every program is proprietary, right? So they have their own way to create their translation memory. It's like I don't know, I'm gonna put together a scarf. So I'm gonna knit until some point, and then I give it to Giovanna. But Joanna doesn't knit, she crochets. So it's not gonna be compatible to the way she works. But if I knit and Holly knits, she can continue knitting that scarf, so to speak. So that's when you have the compatibility. I don't have the tools to explain it deeper. This is the most simple way I can do it. So some programs are compatible with others. I cannot tell you which one from the top of my head because I just use WordFest. So it's gotten to a point that I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I just send it to a friend of mine that has Stratos.
Mhm.
And then if she gets a WordFest project, she sends it to me. So the other thing, so find someone in your language combination that has a tool you don't have. So you just send it to her, and then she sends it to you.
Okay, so I'm gonna add another thing in the search of a CAT tool, look for their rules for compatibility, because now the technology is advancing to the fact that you can export the TM in another format that makes it easy. But that would want to be a conversation that you have with your client, right? Can you send me the TM in this format so you
Mhm.
don't go crazy? But it's good for you to know how to phrase it. And so if you enter in that world, then you know what to do. Thank you, Gloria. The crochet and the knitting was an extraordinary example.
I try.
All right, well, thank you very much. If there is no other questions, one more, there's a comment, follow-up previous presentation. Here is a study about errors and prolonged. Oh, it's Luis. Thank you, Luis.
But you sound disappointed. Oh, it's Luis. It's like, it's a great study.
No, I
just
thought it
Luis.
was a question, but it's him following up. Okay,
It's even better. It's a free resource.
yeah, great. We can grab it from there. All right.
Okay,
thank you
guys,
very
have a
much.
good rest of the day.
Oh, hi, Rita. I met you ages ago with, oh my God, Tina.
Yes, Holly and Gloria will send us the information, and then we will send it along, attached
just
with
that-
the email with the recording of this session.
Yes.
So thank you very
Please.
much, Mary. Thank you very much, Holly and Gloria. We really appreciated you being here this morning. And thank you, everybody, for spending your Saturday with us. We will see you in our next event, which will be our next EduTalk in April. Talk to you guys later.